Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 20th, 2023. Over the weekend, we had vivid examples of the contrast between the two paradigms confronting humanity today. On the one side, we had marches occurring against NATO's proxy war against Russia. This included marches in Germany and in the United States. On the other side, we had the NATO defense ministers meeting and then the Munich Security Conference. So let's begin with the rallies that took place. The Munich rally was outside the Munich Security Conference gathering, which was a pro-war demonstration, including large delegations from Ukraine and from the United States. But there were estimates of as many as 20,000 people marching against the war. This was much larger than organizers expected, but augurs well because there are more than 200 demonstrations scheduled over the next week in German cities alone. Also, there'll be marches in London, Paris, Rome, and elsewhere. And the governments of NATO member countries are discovering increasingly that their population is not willing to undergo the austerity demanded in order to provide weapons for a war that most of them don't support. So we'll see whether these governments get the message or not. Now, note, by the way, that the NATO countries are admitting difficulty in supplying the weapons that are needed, including, despite the big talk from Anglo-American circles, no planes from the U.S., no long-range precision missiles are coming so far, and the tanks are going to be delayed. So the attempt to gear up the war is itself running into the problems of the austerity that are being imposed as part of the war economy. Now, in Washington, there was broad representation breaking through the left-right profile and the identity politics that have hampered the mobilization against the war. There were 3 former congressmen who spoke. There were representatives of various groups ranging from libertarians to people who did represent what used to be called the progressive left. There were very real prominence of LaRouche Organization. Video included Helga Zepp-LaRouche, which was part of a clip from nuclear war expert Stephen Starr warning about the danger of thermonuclear war. Also, there was a speech from Diane Sayre and from Jose Vega. I just want to quote a little bit from Diane Sayre's speech, where she said, quote, "We are here because there seems to be no bottom, no boundary to the depravity of our own government. They would never do that has been violated repeatedly, to the point that we can be almost certain that if we, the people, don't step in, we are headed over the cliff to nuclear annihilation." She went on, "We are here because we've been living a lie. As poor Lady Macbeth discovered, once you commit one crime, tell one lie, it multiplies until you reach your tragic end. Unless you choose not to be tragic. We are here because we choose not to be tragic." And I'm sure you'll be able to find Diane's speech on the LaRouche Organization website or Schiller Institute. Very powerful, as was the presentation by Jose Vega. Now, these marches took place in spite of heavy counter-organizing. On the one side, a blackout in the media of the organizing for the event, and then secondly, sniping at various groups and speakers involved coming from the FBI-controlled so-called left and right. So these represent a very powerful beginning to the emergence of a voice of the people against nuclear annihilation, against the constant spending for wars, while too many people are living under bridges. Now, let's go to the NATO defense ministers and Munich Security Conference, to the fantasy world of La La Land. I reported last week on what Stoltenberg said at the NATO defense ministers meeting, but it's worth revisiting. He said that the arms shipments and financing to Ukraine must continue in spite of the depletion of the stockpiles of weapons in the NATO countries, and the collapse of the industrial base to replenish it. He said this industrial base must be geared up, working, quote, hand in hand with defense industries, unquote, an open admission that the beneficiaries of this war policy are the very military-industrial complex companies that are pushing the transatlantic region into this war. Now, he also insisted at the Munich Security Conference, that the NATO countries must continue to insist on free trade policies. So the imperial economic policy is directly tied to the imperial military policy. Now, Ursula von der Leyen put forward another damning admission. She said that she at the European Union was working with the White House, preparing sanctions months before Russia launched the special military operation in February 2022. And she announced that they're now preparing a 10th sanctions package. And Borrell, the nutcase, who's one of the leaders of the foreign ministry of the European Commission, described sanctions as a, quote, slow-acting but certain poison, unquote. So they're admitting they're trying to destroy nations using sanctions, and that these preceded any launch of a special military operation. And this is on top of the admission of Hollande and Merkel that the Minsk Accords were just window dressing to allow time for Ukraine to be prepared to launch a war against Russia. So who is preparing for this war? Who is pushing for it? Who is doing advanced preparations? It was NATO. And it shows that it's a lie to say that Putin's actions were unprovoked. Meanwhile, Blinken is demanding a war crimes tribunal against Russia. He made that statement at the Munich Security Conference. The Russian ambassador to the United States, Antonov, said that in doing this, the U.S. is turning a blind eye toward the atrocities of Ukraine, ignoring the killings in Odessa in 2014, as well as the killings and shelling of Donbass from 2014 to 2022, which he said included documented attacks on kindergartens, schools, hospitals, and residential buildings, hardly locations from which threats to Ukraine were being launched. So you have the acknowledgement of the preparations for war, and then you have on top of that the Hersh revelations that the U.S. blew up the pipeline. Keep that in mind. Don't let that be blacked out of your memory because of the lack of coverage in the media. It's an important factor of who's committing war crimes in this situation. Now, finally, let me just update you on the China spy balloon. The U.S. is being mocked internationally for its reaction. The Defense Department is now admitting that it may have been a weather balloon and that we won't know because they can't collect the debris that they shot down that was supposed to confirm that it was a spy balloon. They're also admitting that they watched the balloon from takeoff be pushed by strong wind currents from what was probably its intended direction to bring it over the continental United States. Did they not check with a weatherman before they shot it down? How intelligent is the intelligence community that they would use a $500,000 missile to shoot down a weather balloon? And then they shot down 3 more civilian balloons, some of which were probably worth less than $20. Now, the World Meteorological Organization reported that there are 1,000 weather balloons that are providing data at any point in time, gathering valuable information on air pressure, wind speed, temperature, and humidity. So rather than a great act of military prowess to secure the safety of all Americans, as Biden and numerous senators from both parties assured us that shooting down the weather balloon was, it's a demonstration of war hysteria on steroids. And as such, it's a danger to all people of all nations. And that's why these demonstrations upcoming are so important. So find out where there are demonstrations in your area and join them. Now, we have 2 upcoming events next week that will feed into this. One is on Tuesday, the event calling for the lifting of the sanctions against Syria, given the tragedy of the earthquake there. And then on the 23rd, a seminar on the Nord Stream pipelines. Both of these are online Zoom events. I'll have the registration at the links at the bottom of the description page. Join us for that. And I hope I'll be able to post the wonderful song that was written about Biden and the pipeline. I heard it through the grapevine. If I can't post it, I'll let you know where to find it in the next days. So thanks for joining me today. Become active before it's too late.